Good afternoon, Professor and colleagues. I've noticed in the book review articles that I've read that scholars typically refer to the book's preface or introduction and begin the review by reciting the author's thesis. So, to summarize and critically review Larry Hirato's book, I first identified his purpose and thesis. He effectively states in his preface that he has written two books within Destroyer of the Gods. The first reflects his original purpose or intent, which was to simply identify aspects of early Christianity that made it, quote, distinctive, even odd, and in the cultural environment of the first 3 centuries AD, end quote. The second purpose evolved from the first and proffers how those unique features have, quote, shaped assumptions about religion in large parts of our world today, end quote. That's at preface page 11, or XI. Thus, his thesis is to demonstrate how features of early Christianity that were objectionable in the ancient Roman culture have become unquestioned assumptions about religion in much of the modern world. Introduction, page 1. He emphasizes that these features have become commonplace notions for many people in the Western world. According to Nicholas Wood in his article, The Encounter Between Western and Eastern Religions and Culture, the three dominant Western religions are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So the thesis of my book critique and this discussion board is that Hirato actually achieves his goal of demonstrating how some aspects of early Christianity were objectionable to ancient Roman culture, but he fails in his goal of demonstrating how those practices have created new assumptions in Western Judaism and Islam. The chapter I have chosen to review is chapter 2 because I think it observes what was perhaps the main difference between Christianity and the Roman culture of the first 2 centuries. Hirato describes them in terms of both orthodoxy and orthopraxy. His three differences are monotheism, his notion of religion, and number 3, idolatry. For monotheism, Hirato observes that what distinguished Christianity from pagan religious practice and many of the new religious movements, some of which he says in a later chapter were more like social clubs, was their firm insistence that there is only one true and living God, combined with the demand that adherents had to drop all worship of any other deity. That caused many Roman-era people to consider Christianity as, quote, rank impiety, end quote, or even atheism, which I found was interesting. Hirato makes the excellent point that the Christian God is radically transcendent and not capable of being represented by any image, and whose worshippers could engage with personally. Finally, unlike the pagan gods, the Christian God had no need of anything. You didn't need to leave him little gifts and trinkets at the temple. For religion, for this feature, Hirato argues that the modern Western world considers religion as a distinguishable area of life. I found this quote odd. He doesn't cite any support for his premise. None of the people in my worship community would apply that definition to religion, and it seems to contradict Paul's teaching in Philippians 1:21 that, quote, to live is Christ, end quote. One of the things I like to do when Mary and I go on cruises is to visit with people of other religions. I've had many Hindus tell me that Hinduism is not even a religion at all, but is rather a way of life. That is exactly how Hirato describes that first century Judaism was designated as a, quote, way of life exhibited by observing the commands of Jewish law, end quote. I was checking my time clock and now I've lost my place. There we go. Oh, and his other main point is that Paul did not believe that he changed religions from Judaism to Christianity when the Lord blinded and saved him. Hirato then writes that he wants to repeat the point for emphasis. So I concur with how he describes Paul and whether Paul viewed himself religious, but dissent that modern Christ followers see their faith any differently at all than how Paul viewed his. Part of the challenge in analyzing Hirato's work is whether he uses the word Christianity to refer to the religion or to Christ followers who comprise the body of Christ. If it's the former, I have no disagreement with him. Hirato then argues that Roman religion was more focused on orthopraxy than orthodoxy. In other words, their religious practices were more explicit and obvious than their religious beliefs were. So at this point of his book, Hirato defines religion as worship, which leads to his third difference, which is polytheistic idols. For idols, Hirato has a short section entitled A World Full of Gods and writes that all of them had objects associated with them, like a carved foot left as a gift to the gods in appreciation of having your foot healed, for example. In one of his first letters, Paul commends the Thessalonians for turning from idols to God. There, the term for idol often meant phantom. Hirato then asks an important question that does not satisfactorily relate to his thesis. His question is, if this negative attitude towards the gods was already expressed by Jews, how remarkable and noteworthy could it have been for early Christians to echo it as well? I was asking myself the same thing as I was reading. In answering his own question, Hirato admits that the Jewish practice of avoiding idols was considered, quote, bizarre and objectionable by Roman culture. So he argues that Jews were viewed as a distinct ethnic group where avoiding idols was part of their national peculiarities that Roman culture, quote, took in stride. He then offers that it was particularly offensive for Christians to avoid idols because Christians were Gentiles who formerly practiced idolatry. So Hirato's argument is not really that avoiding idolatry was unique, but rather that what made Christianity unique was converting from idol worshippers to abstaining from idols. To me, there are two weaknesses to Hirato's argument. The first is definitional. Again, one of the problems I had in reading his book was trying to figure out who he is talking about in various sections. If he's going to talk about a religion as opposed to Christ followers, he needs to be consistent and observe that, like Judaism, the religion of Christianity never worshiped idols. Christian believers who formerly worshiped idols before they joined the religion. So you can't talk about religion and then try to draw this distinction between Jew and Gentile. His second weakness seems to be historical. The first century Roman persecution of Christians occurred when, according to Hirato's admission, most Christians were Jews. So the control group for testing Hirato's theory that Roman culture distinguished between Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians would appear to be those first century persecuted Jewish Christians. So, in summary, Curato in chapter 2 presents three aspects of Christianity that were different from first century Roman religion. So he accomplishes his first goal, the first book he was going to write. But he does not distinguish them from the Hebrew scriptures or Judaism as a religion. And he makes no attempt to show how those practices in any way affected the other dominant religions of Judaism and Islam in modern Western culture, which both consider themselves children of Abraham. So I didn't feel that he accomplished his thesis, although he did provide some very interesting information, and one of which was to make us more sensitive to how big a deal idol worship was, which explains why Paul wrote so much about it. Thank you very kindly for your time, and I look forward to watching y'all's videos. Now I'll see if I can turn this off.